We haven't quite got a full team. I just thinking, do you want to close the gap there between Sarah and Ian? Make it look like that we do speak to each other. We've come to a part in the day where it's I thought it was a good opportunity for any questions to be raised. These largely, with one or two absentees, are the makeup of the LSB. So some are new in that perspective in terms of the board. I'll introduce, obviously you've heard from Jed earlier. Tegrin Jones, who's next to Jed then, starting from my far left, is the Chief Executive of Pembrokeshire Coast National Park Authority. Sue Leonard is the Chief Executive of PAVS. Ian Westley is the Acting Head of Paid Service for Pembrokeshire County Council. Sarah Beck is next to Ian, and Sarah, I can't remember your title, I'm sorry. Director of Strategic Partnerships. And then we have Bernie Rees immediately next to me, who is the Chair of Hywel Health Board. So there we are, and we can invite the first question. Rosie, you have the microphone, so there's another microphone with Nick, so hands in the air if you'd like to ask a question, please. Don't all jump at once. Okay, we do have some on the board that we can fall back on. In the absence of people understanding that this isn't an interactive part of the meeting. Nick, yeah. Can you read something out for us?
Yeah, fine. What will the effect be? What will be the effect of closures at Withybush on people and other organisations in Pembrokeshire? What will the LSB do about this?
Okay, thank you. Fairly narrow focus on the first question, and probably, Bernie, you can recognise that I'm likely to hand this one to you.
Good question to start with. I think that there has been real clinical reasons for some of the changes that have taken place at Withybush. We are in the process of an evaluation, and this week coming to the board is an evaluation process that will give us a whole new opportunity to look at what those experiences have been for those individuals concerned. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that Withybush has got significant challenges in front of it. And it isn't really about those changes that have taken place. It's about us getting to a position where our local hospital, that we all value, that we are all striving to keep healthy and sustainable, needs to be recruiting. And to do that, that is what I'm asking partners to do with the LSB, to be able to help us to make Pembrokeshire become an employer of choice, not only for health, but for all elements that will attract people to want to work in this fabulous county. All around us today we've got scenery, and the way that we live in Pembrokeshire is second to none. I have to say, though, that it needs a more innovative style of service delivery that is actually going to be able to attract our young up-and-coming professionals to come and work in Pembrokeshire. I'm talking about health, but I would also suggest that that's going to be a challenge for all of us in public service.
Just perhaps a couple of words to add to that, because the question alludes to the LSB as a whole, and obviously Bernie is part of that, but obviously concentrating in her role as chair of the health board. I think it's important to understand, and I think there's an appreciation when we've discussed the matter in the local authority, that the status quo is simply not achievable in many cases, and many services will always have to change, always have to evolve. And that's something we recognise from the work that we do within our own confines, be they budgetary pressures, changing demographics, or indeed changing needs and circumstances. But one of the key things that we're able to do through the LSB process is effectively hold each other to account as partners for the decisions, and perhaps looking at some of the unintended consequences of decisions which have a knock-on effect in other areas of service. So sometimes it's very difficult to look at things in isolation, although very often that's what the media and press would wish us to do, but we have to recognise that true public service is about integration as well. Okay. Do you want to keep looking at that list there?
Well, I got one here that's perhaps a bit more relevant to all partners and something that will be on the minds of everyone at the front there, and that's how will budget concerns impact on partnership working, and how will the financial constraints we're all operating under affect the ability of the LSB to do its work?
Inevitably, it'll affect us all quite significantly. Interestingly, I'd throw it back and it would say that it would improve partnership working by necessity. And in many cases, we've been in a privileged position as public authorities over many decades where budgets have risen year on year. And it's only in the last 3 years, certainly from our own perspective as a local authority, that budgets have started to go in the opposite direction. There's a clear message coming from central and Welsh Government about the need to effectively restrict the growth of the public sector. Now, that's a slightly political statement, but it's a fact, and we are receivers of that funding, and we have very little influence over the funding that we receive. So inevitably, I think that as we look for more innovative ways of working, partnership working will certainly play a large part in that. I've sort of opened it and left it rather open, and I'll probably refer to everyone. Sue, you've got a microphone in your hand. Do you want to begin? Because your role, and very often you'll hear many people in public service, in public authorities, say that they want to engage the third sector more. And the danger is, I'm sure Sue will feel that everybody says, it's fine, it can be passed to the third sector. Well, simply doing that isn't the solution that we all think it is. And Sue, I might have led you on a little path there, but I'll hand over to you.
Okay, is it working? Yes, there we are, you can hear me. Yes, thank you. And I suppose the first thing to say is that I'd agree with Jamie in that the budget cuts have actually started to drive innovation and change. So, and I think it's unfortunate that we've kind of had to be pushed to the edge of crisis before we can consider, things around co-design and co-production of services that we have been pushing for the last 4 to 5 years are now suddenly full on, right at the top of the agenda. So I think it is unfortunate. I think we should learn something from that if times get good again, that we don't all retract into our comfortable silos and continue to work in silos, that we actually embrace the opportunity to work more innovatively and collaboratively together and keep going at it, because I do think it is the better, it is a solution, or it can contribute. However, in terms of whether or not the third sector can simply step up and start to deliver a whole range of services, no, we can't. And the other thing is that volunteers, everything can be done by volunteers, volunteering is not free. And I think that's really important. So it's not that we can just stop paying for some services and expect volunteers to step up and deliver those services for nothing. However, there is an opportunity to look at a different way of delivering that service that, yes, will involve volunteers, could involve a social enterprise approach to service delivery, and I think would be a good partnership. I don't think it should be the third sector or the public sector. It should be the public sector and third sector working in partnership. So I think we could be part of the solution, but I think it would be false hope to just say, oh well, the third sector can just step up and do it all. But early dialogue, the willingness to try out new things, and I think we've heard a little bit about managed risk taking. I think that needs to happen as well. There is potential for great things to happen. But the third sector organisations, we're all facing the same kind of reductions in funding. It's very, very difficult out there at the moment for us all. But I do think the best chance is working together.
Thanks, Sue. Just taking it back to public sector, the microphone's been handed this way. Ian, do you want to just sort of look at a local authority perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, Jamie, from our point of view in the County Council, we've had many discussions over the last year, 18 months or so, about how we might bridge the gap in funding, and we've talked principally of perhaps three options. The first one being or to do less of the same, which is perhaps not very innovative and is stating the blindingly obvious. We've talked about doing more of the same, but doing it more efficiently and more effectively, and trying to squeeze out some savings as a consequence of that. And then finally, perhaps some people might say, we're talking about doing things completely differently. And actually, I think the latter is where the big prize is likely to be. And it was pleasing for me this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, but also this morning in some discussions with colleagues, that we were reflecting on a great willingness, I think, among partner organisations, staff in all of those that I've spoken to, and leaders, be it political leaders or managerial leaders in those organisations, seem to me to have a great will to start looking at different ways of providing services. But I think at that time we're all reflecting that the real trick and the success is actually going to be in an ability to convert that will into tangible outcomes. And I think in Pembrokeshire, that's probably where we all need to have a good hard look at ourselves and make a step change in terms of delivering that willingness into something that matters. I think today, one of the themes that has recurred in a few of the presentations that we listen to is the option to pool budgets. I've heard mentioned 2 or 3 times. We all recognise as organisations up here that some of us in varying degrees are involved in providing very similar, sometimes even exactly the same services. There's bound to be some duplication in there. And I suspect that one of the barriers against turning that willingness into something that makes a tangible difference is the fact that at the moment we're separate organisations. So to come back to the first question that Nick read out off the board there, what role the LSB, I appreciate that question was specifically aimed at the issues about services provided at Withybush, but actually in terms of the question it applies across the board, I think, for all of the services that as public bodies and voluntary sector organisations we're all involved with. So to me, I think the big opportunity is to turn that willingness into something that makes a difference, but I think it's also going to have to happen quite quickly. So there's an issue for me about timescales as well, I think.
Really?
I agree with everything Ian said. The one thing that I will say is we've got to take the learning from the past. There's been really, really good years of partnership that have gone on in Pembrokeshire, but we've done it without full engagement of our public. And I think if I'm going to take any lessons within health and what is different and what does different look like, the public have to own that. And so we've really got to go up a few gears in terms of how we engage with the public of Pembrokeshire so that they take ownership of actually some of these challenges that we're facing together as public services.
Thank you. I have to say this is my first outing, so I haven't really been part of any discussion, so I'm probably reflecting perhaps a personal or more narrow view. But a couple of things I would say. I totally agree about the engagement with the public. I think there is a major challenge, and I don't think the public understand that challenge. I sat in on a number of PCC's events and actually was slightly concerned, or significantly concerned really, how sort of there was a lack of understanding what's in front of us. I accept the point about timing, but I say that some of these take time, and I think for us to do it successful, we need to take a longer-term view. Perhaps look to see where we are likely to want to be in 5 years' time, and then use that time to put in place the measures to build capacity in various sectors, decide who's best to do things as well. So perhaps I think that is one area I'd like to see the LSB actually sit down and have a look. If you scenario plan under certain circumstances, where can you end up? And the final one I'd like to look at is prevention. Looking at very narrow at my own organisation, there's a fantastic national park. Surely we could use that in far better to prevent people rather than spending a lot of money on health and curing people. So perhaps that's one I would have a particular interest in as well.
Jed?
Thanks. Also new to the LSB. But one of the things for me is we have a number of shared outcomes. And I think where we can identify that we do have these outcomes that we share, we should be looking at smart ways of delivering them together. And there are barriers to that, cross-warranting of officers, that sort of thing. But I think where we do have these shared outcomes, we should really be looking at smart ways of delivering them and seeing what we can work together.
Okay. Sarah, I'll give you the opportunity, but...
Well, I was going to really echo what Ian was saying about pooled budgets. We've nearly been there. We've got all the paperwork. We've done lots of the work. I think there's something about the pace at which I think we now have to do these things. We've wanted to do them, but I think that will push us over the line. So that might be doing things jointly with the pool budget. It might be asking one or other partner to lead on the things, and we delegate that function and let go of it. So I think as partners, we're going to have to learn to let go of some things that we've historically done and let others do it who could do it as well or better than us. And that will be very hard at all levels in our organisations. So I think we've got a leadership role here to help everyone in every layer of our organisations let go of things that they feel that they've birthed and born and developed over many years, and that will be difficult.
That's a very fair point. There's a question in front of me here. Do you want we'll just wait for the microphone. Sorry, Nick.
Thank you. As somebody who's actually moved into Pembrokeshire about 12 years ago, I think a lot of the problems that we face is around infrastructure, which is either roads, broadband, anything like that. I think it's great to be at the forefront of things, but you can't be at the forefront and have a great county if half the county is left out because they haven't even got roads. And I think if we, as Pembrokeshire, want to move on, we need to put a lot more effort into making sure that the basics are there for everybody. And it means, it's great to have a fantastic broadband speed, but if you would have to choose between half the county actually having half that speed but decent ones throughout, and decent road lanes throughout, it would engage more people to come to Pembrokeshire, it would engage more businesses to come to Pembrokeshire. We've had the refinery on a shutdown, and now we're building a bypass. Fantastic. It should have been done 50 years ago. I came to Pembrokeshire as a tourist for about 17 years until I moved here. I've seen that talk about the bypass back then. Now it's being done, but the refinery is shutting down. And I think that's what's been happening throughout Pembrokeshire, is that there's been a delay. And I think we need to put a lot more effort into how can we push bigger organizations to get the basics right before we want to be at the forefront.
Okay. Thank you. Your question obviously alludes to infrastructure in a general sense, and Ian, I know that part of your current as well as former role in the council as director of transport and environment has involved some pretty robust discussions with Welsh Government over the level of investment, both to the county and within it. So I think I'll hand you.
An observation, Jamie, if I might. I don't disagree with anything at all, actually, that the gentleman said there, but I don't think, and I'm not suggesting that this, or putting forward this view as an excuse at all, but I don't think what you've highlighted is peculiar to Pembrokeshire, but it might be peculiar to public services. You struck a bell, or struck a chord with me particularly in your comments about the Bulford Road work that you're referring to, starting on site within a couple of seconds, it seemed, of the announcement of Merkel Refinery closing. And it took me back to the early 80s when I just started working in the public sector, working as I was then in the South East Wales valleys. And even then, at that time when I spent a lot of time there was about 7 coal mines still functioning. Within about 4 years, there were none. Within about 10 years, there was the biggest investment in infrastructure I've ever seen. And it occurred to me at the time that it was at least 40 years too late. But I don't know what that tells us, probably something about the planning cycles, I think, and the fact that there's always going to be a problem in catching up with demand, maybe on planning large infrastructure investment. But having said that, although it didn't help perhaps the industrial heritage of that part of the world I was in at the time, it has helped a long time afterwards in terms of wider scale regeneration. So it's a short-term problem, I appreciate that. There was some encouraging news a week or so ago in terms of Mergo. Remains to be seen whether the investment in the road will help kick that on perhaps to another level. But in general terms of what you were saying, don't disagree with you at all. I've particularly taken as well with your comment about whether or not we want a Rolls-Royce broadband speed in some areas rather than something more acceptable in all areas. And I suspect the latter might benefit the county more.
Just to mention, obviously, you'll be aware of broadband rollout, superfast broadband, in partnership between BT and Welsh Government. As part of my involvement in the Merco task force, and I've had agreement from Mrs Hart, the Minister for Economy, Science and Transport, that superfast broadband will be rolled out throughout Pembrokeshire prior to any other county, and that's to be welcomed.
Yeah, the difficulty with that is that ISB delayed and delayed, taking it back to the original issue that has been also been put back. I actually live literally at the back of the refinery. I don't get it. Yet I can't get the alternative grant. So I can't also get the alternative grant to get an alternative broadband version through satellite. So you're sort of stuck. And that takes it back, it gets put back and put back. We don't want Rolls Royces. I couldn't care less about a Rolls Royce. I'd like a car. And that makes us go everywhere. Because public transport isn't that great. Trains aren't that great. We haven't got an airport. And the nearest is Cardiff, but that's limited. So all in all, we are literally at the far west. And we are missing out on basics. And I think, as a result, local services do struggle, because it's those people that live in those rural areas, which is a large part of Pembrokeshire, that do struggle to either get to people or people to get to the services. That's what makes it so difficult.
What's particularly concerning about your words is that you live so close to what is part of the enterprise zone, and yet are still not able to access that broadband capacity, which I think, Martin, you're nodding, it's something we will pick up on. Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions before we resort to those that you've put on the board? Should we resort to one of those again while somebody has a little think about what they want to say?
Okay, the increase in modern slavery, human trafficking and supporting victims gives us, as partners, a new challenge. Where should this sit in developing a multi-agency response? Okay,
that is a challenging one for us. Sinead, did you have anything to do with this? No. Okay. But in terms of that, and obviously in terms of our expertise at board level, it's going to be very limited to drill down to that level of detail. But clearly, there will be, and I know some people who can answer the question very well. But in terms of the board's responsibility, and that's perhaps delving into the structured process which the board is engaged with. And it's one of the themed groups that will, obviously, under the Community Safety Partnership, which will effectively look at that matter. Now, interestingly, you might think, and Sinead alluded to this point in her presentation, that this situation would never arise in Pembrokeshire. Well, it does, and it did. And you will recall, and I think there was a case of somebody based at Castlemartin from memory, and there was an Irish context to this scenario, and there was a successful prosecution to that situation. So just because we are in the far west, just because we are remote, doesn't mean that we don't have the challenges that everybody else faces. And I think that's very much recognised by us. Sue, you?
Well, I was just going to say that it might be because we're in the rural west that we could face some of these problems. And, you know, there's been a lot of examples, maybe not in Pembrokeshire, but, you know, we've all heard of them on the news where, you know, people are working on farms in very poor conditions and have been sort of more or less kept on those farms for years. And so I think in terms of what the role of the LSB, as Jamie said, we do have work streams that actually, you know, report to us, so we can keep an eye on things and challenge. We don't think enough is being done. But certainly I think part of our role is a leadership role, and it is about raising awareness. And not because I think a lot of people think, slavery? What, here in Pembrokeshire? Never. But I think it's about raising awareness, and certainly some of the really good work that's been done in schools and in Pembrokeshire College to raise awareness amongst young people around a whole range of issues, around hate crimes and respect and other things. I think that education and ensuring that young people learn about these things early on is a key thing. So I think it's one of just leadership and awareness raising, and even having champions, which I know, you know, that's a very overused, you know, I tend to sort of slightly groan when I hear, oh, what are we doing, I don't know, to tackle poverty, or we've got a couple of anti-poverty champions, and you feel like, okay, well, that isn't actually job done. But in terms of raising, you know, bringing things to the forefront and saying, actually, we consider these to be important, that's what champions do, just kind of signifies that we give it proper importance. So I think maybe some, you know, a champion around this area of work.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick, for raising that off the board.
Jamie, did you want me?
Ali? Yeah,
sorry, did you want
please.
me to just add a little bit more?
Absolutely.
Really, just
yeah.
because from our perspective in children's services, I think we raised earlier the Act will bring us the National Safeguarding Board, and that's going to help us to draw together some of the strategies that we're seeing coming out of Welsh Government at the moment. So we are working on child sexual exploitation, child trafficking, people trafficking, slavery. But for us, if we stop and think about it, it's not new. We're raising awareness on it, but we're using different terms to describe a dilemma that's been there for a long time in the way that people are used and abused, unfortunately. So child trafficking has been around for a long time, unfortunately. People trafficking has been around. And slavery, and how you define that. And very poor working conditions, prostitution, child prostitution, they aren't new to us, and those of us who've been around for some time are well aware of those challenges, and it's good that we are reframing that and re-looking at the current challenges with the use of the internet that broadens out the accessibility for some of these perpetrators to target into areas that perhaps we would see them easily before. So we would see people coming into our communities and we could easily identify them. Now the internet secretly allows people in and allows vulnerable people to be targeted in a different way. So there are many challenges for us, and I think the challenge for the LSB going forward is about prioritising which ones are we going to be working hard on in Pembrokeshire? What are we going to challenge? Because we can't do it all at the same time. We've got a reduction in resources, and at the same time we want to improve our services. So it's for us, we'll be looking backwards, saying, okay, we've got the national drivers, we've got the local drivers, and we want to see the direction from the leadership of the prioritisation of those issues, and through the regional board and back up to the LSB, I think we'll get there. But yeah, just to give some context, there is a lot going on with all of those themes.
Okay. Thanks, Ali. Thanks for adding that. Any further questions? No, all very silent. Nick, we'll have to resort to you once again, I'm afraid, for one off the board.
Okay, this handwriting's going to catch me out at some point. Despite the Minister for Public Services' rejection of co-production, which should be ignored, how is the LSB intending to ensure that co-production is developed and progressed?
Gosh, what a tricky one. I mean, clearly, the Minister for Public Services has his own take on where he wishes to take public services in general, local authorities specifically. I've been asked on many occasions for my view on that element of his consideration. I think my views are sort of are well versed, and I think actually they've been backed up by some of the things that have been said today in terms of the way that we in Pembrokeshire consider public services. And interestingly, I have to say, the fact that the LSB functions in the way it does is a really good example of joined up public services. And the opportunity, to me, to save public money is within our grasp, within our county. And I think that that's not often accepted, might not often be understood elsewhere, but I think in Pembrokeshire we have a unique opportunity to deliver that model of public services. Bernie?
And as a health board, we have 3 unique opportunities to deliver those public services. So it's doing it well and doing it once from our perspective. And I go back to what I said earlier on. We do have a good platform for partnership, and Jamie's quite right. We do it well in Pembrokeshire. There is a need now, though, and I think some of the questions have alluded to that. We need to go further and we need to go faster. And it isn't about the ministerial priorities, with the greatest respect. It's about the priorities that our population need us to deliver as public services, because we're custodians. All these public services, we're only custodians of an opportunity to improve the lives of our population, and we need to take that, and we need to be very mindful about how we take it. The interesting thing to me, that today was advertised as a public service day. I don't know how many members of the population are in this room today. And I would wonder, because there is an absenteeism that makes it even more difficult for us to be mature about the way that we deliver services that will meet all of those challenges that are in front of us and deliver for the ministers.
Okay, anybody else want to come in on that point? Sue, do you want to come in?
Well, yes, in terms of Leighton Andrews, I think he is supportive of the process of co-production, but he doesn't like jargon, so he doesn't like the language. I forget now what he prefers to call it, but it was 4 jargonistic words as opposed to just co-production. He had a preference, but it was still jargon. And interestingly, Mark Drakeford is a co-production champion, and is a keynote speaker at many conferences where he champions co-production and active citizenship and the use of time banking and other mechanisms. So, but I think that it is about, just in terms of co-production, it's not about getting too hung up on the language. It is about the doing of things. And I think for me, co-production is more, it's about an approach to services. So it's not about providers and then people that those services are done to, but it is much more about a collaborative approach where the person who's receiving the service also plays a part in that service. So they're not just a passive recipient of a service, they become active contributors. And that actually is a massive culture change, not just for service providers, but for service beneficiaries as well, who are used to just kind of phoning up the council and having something done, or demanding a service of the health board or whatever it is. My concern is that when I look at Welsh Government particularly, what's their answer to things getting difficult? Oh God, we'll reshuffle everything and we'll issue another 10 strategies, and we'll tie people up in consultations and action plans, and we'll set up new structures. So, new partnership arrangements, new, boards, work stream, programme boards, new local authority boundaries, whatever it is, we'll shuffle the deck chairs and everybody gets terribly hung up on it. But actually in Pembrokeshire, people are still going to be living in the communities in Pembrokeshire. It doesn't matter what boundaries are redrawn. The same issues are going to pertain for the people living in those rural communities, still want access to services. So I think as a local service board, we should kind of forget the dross around the regional working and who's going to be, whether we'll merge with Ceredigion or who or what, and just focus on doing what we can do, which is get the localism and the co-production infrastructure right here in Pembrokeshire and get it working for people locally. And then whatever structures emerge regionally, we're protected. We've got a resilient Pembrokeshire, is what we're after. And then it doesn't matter what happens up there, we're better off locally. And I think we need to do a bit more about workforce development and things to change attitudes and behaviours and cultures, which are not achieved by just changing structures and processes, and that's all we seem to focus on. So that would be my plea.
Thank you. Sarah?
I just wanted to build on that. I think co-producing the way we go forward, the approaches, whatever the jargon you use, whether that's at an individual level or at a partner level, is actually the answer to what you were talking about, which is we will have less money and we want to deliver better services. Our experience, we've done some co-production with the third sector, but where we're, if we take a health example, if we're looking at a service, let's take neurology, where we've brought in the third sector organisations that support people and our patients who've got those conditions and asked them to work with our clinicians, our nurses, our physios and describe how that should change, they are better and more responsive for the patient who's got that condition, and they are cheaper. Because actually most patients don't want the highest tech medical all singing or dancing specialist centre. They want care that makes a difference to their life. And so it ends up always being less expensive. And still we miss that trick still people go off and design things without that. So I think if we as a local service board can free up our frontline clinicians, service, all of our staff, all of the people in the public service, to work with people as individuals, we will harvest better services and less money and stop messing around with all structures and just focus on individuals. We talk about people being at the centre, but we don't do it very well, and I think where we do it well, services are better and delivered within the budgets that are shrinking.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else? Ian, did you want to come in?
I just wonder, Jane... I just wonder, is it worth a few seconds to reflect on the recent meetings that some of us have had within the County Council, but many of the people that appear, their organisations are represented as well. I don't actually recall a single member of the public talking to us about structures of any description. The only people I remember talking to us about jargon are those that had a deep-rooted dislike for it, like myself. It just doesn't matter to people. Clearly what mattered to them was a quality of service, to the extent that many said, without prompting, that they'd be prepared to pay more for it if they had confidence in the quality of service and the resilience of service. And I think perhaps just to reflect on an experience that I shared with the leader a few weeks ago, where it became very quickly absolutely apparent to me that any representatives from the organisations that sit on the LSB don't actually have it in their gift to change to any great extent any political desire to restructure public services in Wales. I think the very best we can hope for there is to influence. So I would echo Sue's comments that we could certainly do worse, I think, than focus on the day job, and what will be in terms of all the stuff that doesn't actually matter.
Okay, thank you. There's a question at the back there. Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to find out if there was support and recognition for volunteer support groups and who would be the best person really to approach on that subject.
Okay, in terms of volunteer support groups, I know that Joy was here earlier. She's gone now. She's at the back. In terms of, she's very much involved in carer support, and Councillor Mike James there is, and sorry Sue, you'll have to close your ears. He's our carers champion. But I know that's an example of where we recognise the challenge that that carers have in terms of undertaking their daily lives as well as somebody else's effectively, and I think that's quite a unique position for people to be in, many of which are young people, frankly. But in terms of volunteer support, and obviously Sue's organisation PAVS is effectively the go-to umbrella body for the voluntary sector in Pembrokeshire. Sue, do you want to enlarge a bit upon that?
Sorry, your question was, did we recognise the value of
Yeah,
volunteer?
I just wanted to see if there was support and obviously recognition for the people that sort of set up support groups, and basically I do a support group myself, and I just want to see if there's recognition and possibly working with people and seeing if there's support really for us. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I think the quick answer to that would be yes. That, now you may say, well, how are we recognised then? How is our voice heard? In terms of support groups, if it's a sort of carer support group, we do have Pembrokeshire Carers Forum, which brings carers, unpaid carers together to put forward their views and have a voice on a whole range of issues. I think we could do it better. I would definitely say that we need to do things better, and I think we need to do more to enable support groups to set up and be established and be effective. So it's not, I think that's a good example really of where partners, LSB partners, could work together to see what support we could give to enable groups to set up and become established and operate effectively, and then to look at routes to actually getting the views of those support groups heard and involved in terms of service design. But yeah, incredibly valuable. I mean, I'm sure we'd all like to see more established, where there's a need, we need to facilitate that.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, thank you very much. Every year we have the Carers' Rights Day. At the minute, there are so many organisations getting involved with that we're having difficulty to find a hall big enough to hold everybody. So it's getting from strength to strength, and yes, there is support out there.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Tegrin, I do apologise.
It was just, I suppose your question was a bit more specific and has been answered there, but I would like to say probably all the organisations here have a role in terms of promoting volunteering and actually taking a far broader view of volunteering. I think you've referenced things like carers champion, well that's a volunteering where perhaps there is a definitive need, but actually I'd like to see us take a far more positive view in terms of volunteering as an opportunity. I think with younger people, providing different skills, different opportunities that allows them to develop there. So perhaps that might be an interesting one to look across all organisations of how we work with PAVS and other organisations to ensure that we make use of volunteers, particularly at a time where reduced budget and there's a danger, people think, oh yes, we'll cut the costs and then pass it over to volunteers. I think we need to take a more mature and view of it as an opportunity.
It's an interesting point that Tegrin has raised there, because very, very often, as we'll all recognise, it's difficult to engage that element of people volunteering without introducing the crisis, i.e. that this function is likely to close or likely to change significantly, and until that moment in time, it is very difficult to engage members of the public in actually saying, well, I will proactively get engaged in this. And that's a conversation that perhaps as an LSB we need to understand how best to interact with the people of Pembrokeshire. I think it is about, and it has been alluded to by one of the panel members already, about perhaps having a longer term vision of where services are heading, recognising that some services will inevitably be under significant financial pressure to be maintained in their current form, and it may mean that we do have to look at far more co-location of services, far less buildings, pull the cost out of it, keep our staff engaged in the public we serve, but without the overheads of specific buildings. And I think therein lies a lot of opportunity to cut costs out of the system. Right, we have the opportunity of one last question. I'm hoping it will come from the floor. No offence, Nick, but if not, we'll refer back to you off the board. But is there one question that I can cajole members of the audience to present? No? Okay. Oh, thank you, James. We'll get you a microphone. Down in the front, please, Rosie.
Just to oblige your request. I was just wondering, with the advent of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill and to become an Act, and the transformation into a public service board, what are the opportunities there for Pembrokeshire? What will that change actually mean, and what will that sort of do in terms of your aspirations for what that brings to the sort of teamwork that we can see on the stage today?
Well, I think as you've asked the question, it'll be only fair to pass that to Tegrin in terms of what are your aspirations as a new board member. Perhaps we refer to Jed as well, and then we'll work back to the old heads this way.
I knew I should have passed the mic on, actually. I think it's an interesting opportunity, and we're pleased that the National Park Authority is one of, I think, 11 or 12 early adopters in Wales. I think the plan was that we would be up and running by the time the legislation went through, but early adopters is perhaps less early than it was intended. But I think it is very much a different way of thinking. It's about taking the longer-term view. I think that there are major challenges in how we work, because I don't think the regulatory structures have caught up really with how that change is going to happen. But I think it's going to be interesting working as a public service board then, wouldn't it, in terms of where the opportunities are. But perhaps there is nothing more important than looking how we shape and influence the lives of future generations, really. That's the answer, really.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's two things, really, is what do we think we can bring to the partnership. And I think one thing is we're restructuring to be more local in our focus. So we're looking at natural resource management, we're looking at how the environment can be used in different ways, used for people's enjoyment, for conservation, but also to promote the economy as well. And that's a new thing for our organisation coming together, is this multi-purpose way of looking at problem solving. So that's something that we hope to bring, but then something that we hope to get as well in back is when we focus on natural resource management plans, how we do that locally is to tie in, to take advantage of this new way of working, to get the feedback on what you want from us. So I think in the past we've handed plans out to people as though it's our environment and it's not your environment. So I think that's the process we're looking at, getting the environment as a cross-cutting theme, looking at it as a resource to be used and enjoy, and to get the feedback to make it more relevant.
Thanks, Jeff. Sue?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'll just refer back to my previous comment about not wanting to get too hung up on what something's called and structures and so forth. But I do think that both the Wellbeing of Future Generations and the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, well-being is the common theme, and I think that kind of just broadens out our remit a little bit in terms of needing to think about a sort of much more holistic approach to things. So it's, you know, but I know I'm just slightly worried that we'll spend the next 5 years agonising over how we're going to measure improvements in well-being. And, you know, we could get caught up in a whole load of work around indicators and outcome measurements, and then before we know it, we'll be on to another structure and another strategy and another. So again, I think for me, it's about long-term planning, and I think the Public Service Board and the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill will help to remind us that we're about long-term planning for the future of the county, and I would like to see us involve young people and their views much more creatively in the whole process. Pembrokeshire is doing some great work at the moment in terms of hearing the voice of young people. When we talk about future generations, we are talking about those young people who are going to hopefully make their futures here in Pembrokeshire. So we need to be listening and understanding what their vision of this county is going to be in 20 years' time. And then we need to help move towards that.
I think quickly from my point of view, the legislation, I suppose, will provide one opportunity, and it's broader membership, which we've already started to act on. That said, a few of us have already touched on similar views this afternoon, that legislation in itself, I think, will do nothing. What will really make a difference is a positive attitude and the correct mindset. And I'd like to think that all of us up here, and you know, whatever our role has been today, really, quickly, and whatever the motivation is, whether it be finance or anything else, Jamie in his introduction, which seems like a long time ago now, just after lunch, was talking about the changes in some personnel in some of the organisation. Whatever it takes, actually, I sense that there is a different mindset. I think there's a different attitude, and for me, I think that's where the real opportunity lies.
So I think we need to avoid all the distractions of all of the legislation, but the word opportunity is really important. If I look back 10 years, this was started out as a looser partnership it didn't have to be together, and it's worked and matured and developed. We're very invisible, probably, to most people, and I think, I'm not sure whether we need to be visible, but people on the board, they'll now have a duty to work together, which is different, and therefore what becomes a duty becomes measured and becomes something that's expected to be, progress is expected to be seen. So I think we would have felt we had that anyway, but I think that'll be a further push. So I think it gives courage, it will take courage, and I think it will mean that the people on the local service board already have significant powers to make decisions in their organisations, so they will be able to come together and make decisions together within their delegated power that they've already got from their own boards or executive functions, and unblock things, make common sense prevail, bring things together and do things better together. So it'll just be an extra set of teeth, an extra oomph and a duty. The jury will be out, we'll be measured on that a year after it's been in, and I'm sure Welsh Government will measure us within an inch of our life. But it is an opportunity to go faster and further and be more concrete.
I suppose not to repeat what's already been said, it's about a sustainable legacy, and that we can all access as we grow older and our future generations can continue to deliver.
I think Sarah introduced an interesting point for me, that of visibility, and there is a feeling, and many of the, not many, but a few members of council have alluded to the fact that the LSB is something that they never see, they don't get hold of, they don't have the opportunity to scrutinise. And I guess, in a sense, the advance into a public service board is effectively an opportunity for the LSB to come out of the shadows in that context and actually have a very front-leading, almost overt role in terms of leading the discussion around public services. And that's one thing that if I could wave a magic wand from today that we can get that discussion going in Pembrokeshire, then that would be great. And I think, you know, let's be pretty clear about this. There are elements where I feel our organisation has been quite successful in doing that. The discussion, for example, around secondary school organisation. we've managed to bring that to a point. It's one of those emotive subjects, I understand. We've managed to bring that to a point where it is spoken about on the streets of Pembrokeshire, and that's really great, because that starts to engage the public in their service. And I think if we can get LSB across the board to that level of discussion around public services, then that would be great. So thanks, James. You triggered us a nice little discussion there to end. In terms of today, it's quite simply an opportunity for me to wrap up the proceedings. Can I thank the panel members who've been prepared to put themselves on the stage? So thank you for that. It would be amiss of me, really, not to thank all partner organisations who have come and presented, not just those who presented, but also been present to discuss issues that are raised at your market stalls. So thank you very much to you for that. Members of the public, of course, you know, that's why we're here. So please let's all remember that. And in terms of the organisation of the event, I'd like to particularly thank Rosie Thomas, who's been instrumental in doing that. Thank you very much. And I know... And I know that she's been aided and abetted by Mark and his team in scrutiny and partnership. So thank you very much to you all, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.